Part 4, Conversing with Your Spiritual Source. Chapter 14. Your spiritual source can only be what it is. I cannot imagine a God who rewards and punishes the objects of his creation, whose purposes are modeled after our own, a God, in short, who but is a reflection of human frailty. Albert Einstein. And from Emanuel Swedenborg, we are because God is. 5 characteristics of God. Let's now examine the elements that most of us agree define the essence of our Creator, along with how they can help us sensibly approach Him. 1. God is love. We came from love, and we desire to return to that heaven while still on earth. I repeat Emerson's appropriate observation that love is our highest word and the synonym for God. In other words, if we dwell in love, we dwell in God. If God is love and cannot be anything other than what God is, and we wish to have a dialogue with God, then it seems to me that we come to our source in love, or we're wasting our time. God cannot and will not respond to unloving requests. No matter what our religion, whatever we want to discourse with our source of being, we must do so without malice or hatred in our heart. In this way, we'll shift our vibrational energy to a frequency that harmonizes with the highest vibration in the universe, which, of course, is that of spirit. As St. Francis instructs us so simply, where there is hatred, let us sow love. Love and forgiveness will then activate the dormant forces I talked about in the opening parts of this program. That is, the right people and the events will materialize synchronistically. This is because we're in spirit, remembering that God simply can't help if we expect Him to hear anything other than love and forgiveness. As Martin Luther King Jr. once said, we must develop and maintain the capacity to forgive. He who is devoid of the power to forgive is devoid of the power to love. This seems to say it all. So in the private, quiet, prayerful moments of asking for God's help, don't ask Him to help defeat others in any way. Rather, pray, Dear God, make me an instrument of Thy love. I want to be like You. I have forgiven them, and I have forgiven myself. And remember that there can be no forgiveness without love. And without love, there can be no way of being heard by our source. 2. God is peace. One of the most quoted verses in the Old Testament, which may also be my favorite biblical offering, is this: Be still and know that I am God. So a corollary of this might then be agitated and turbulent, and you will never know God. Along with praying or communing with our source with peace in our heart, we must be still. This means taking time to get quiet before meditating, and also monitoring our breathing. As we exhale, we can train ourselves to let go of all of our non-peaceful thoughts, and as we inhale, we can breathe in spirit. We can also ask St. Francis to guide us. He had very little peace in his lifetime, but when he prayed, he knew what his source was like. St. Francis wanted to be in spirit. So rather than asking God to deliver him some peace so that he could escape the disorder and the chaos he saw all around him, he requested, Lord, make me an instrument of Thy peace. In other words, St. Francis knew that God was peace. So in his prayer, he asked to be returned to a state where he'd be like his Creator. We can keep reminding ourselves that all of the non-peace that's in the world is not of God. It's of ego. Then we can ask to be helped back to His peace. This approach will attract the assistance we're requesting. It's all about matching up the vibrational energy of our desire for peace with thoughts and behaviors that are consistently peaceful with those desires. 3. God is all-inclusive. We won't be heard by or receive assistance from our source if we're touting our separateness from our fellow humans. You see, when we seek special individual favors from God, or even when we seek to converse with our source from this perspective, we're once again living an illusion. If God were to acknowledge our belief in separation, perfect oneness wouldn't and couldn't exist. It's impossible for a source that creates everyone, and therefore is in everyone, to even have a dialogue with someone who's harboring ideas of their specialness or separation from everyone else. In conversing with our source, as always, we strive to be more like it. So we need to see ourselves as connected to everyone in the universe as we enter into prayer. Then we can ask for guidance and assistance in summoning the all-inclusive Spirit. Make me an instrument of you. Allow me to see you in everyone I encounter. Help me to see myself in others and to extend first to them what I aspire to myself. I've noticed that this is how you are, and I wish to be just like you. This is the kind of dialogue that activates the dormant forces I've spoken about. The key is getting past your ego-based idea of separation and instead seeing yourself as a part of the oneness of all. As Thomas Aquinas put it so succinctly, true peace consists in not separating ourselves from the will of God. 4. God is abundance. As St. Paul once said, God is able to provide you with every blessing in abundance. So why is there so much apparent shortage in the world, including people starving and living in poverty, and millions of folks having the persistent problem of too much month left at the end of the money? Well, what I can say for certain is that God is not to blame. There's more than enough to go around. After all, we came from a place that knows nothing of deprivation, and we arrived on a planet that has the capacity to grow the food and slake the thirst of every one of its inhabitants many times over. As a species, we human beings have brought the ideas of deficiency and depletions of God's gifts on ourselves, largely by taking very ungodlike actions. God serves all of us, but our greed has made us forget others and focus only on ourselves. As a people and as individuals, we've brought lack to our lives, and we can only fix this deficiency by becoming more like our always serving, endlessly abundant spiritual source. The answers to the resolution of poverty and scarcity are readily available to us, and they'd be resolved tomorrow if we remembered that we're all one on this planet. We all share the same origins, and we all end up back in the same non-place where we began. When we return to spirit in our heart, our governments will align with this truth, and our leaders will emerge from in-spirit consciousness. We need to pray for the elimination of a perceived shortage and approach God in the style of St. Francis with words that go something like, "Make me an instrument of thy endless abundance," rather than asking God to fulfill something that's missing. In this way, we can summon his energy back to us, rather than staying focused on what we don't have. If we focus our thoughts on lack, we'll only attract more of the same. And 5, God is well-being. Spirit never has a fever and knows nothing of illness. So in my humble opinion, it makes no sense to pray or engage in a discourse with God from a perspective of asking to be healed, unless, that is, we have a firm understanding of what we mean by the word heal. If we mean to overcome an illness or infirmity, then I feel that we're again violating the truism that nothing can be what it isn't, including God. As Ernest Holmes once wrote, "The will of God is always good," which means to me that disease, sickness, and suffering are not part of God's energy. On the other hand, if we use the word heal to mean reconnecting to our source of well-being, then we're open to the potential of receiving assistance to overcome any infirmity, and that's how I use the word. I never asked God to help me to get over a feeling of sickness. Even when I had a minor heart attack 5 years ago, I asked to be made an instrument of God's well-being. I acknowledged that my body had taken on non-well-being, be it from my lifestyle, diet, and habits, or the toxins I breathe in and out, whatever. It was not of God, it was of me in this physical world, and I prayed to be reunited to a stream of well-being. I knew that I was a piece of God, and it was just as easy for him to heal a cut on my finger as it was to restore my heart to a healthy state. Since I knew that God's healing power was within me, I just needed to help my body remember this. Similarly, in a time of recent disharmony in my life, I found myself feeling sick to my stomach and unable to sleep, until I remembered that this experience was a gift to me. As I conversed with my higher power, I asked for guidance and visualized myself as a magnet attracting plentiful well-being, and in this way healing was virtually immediate. Before we go on to the next chapter, let's look back to the observation made by Emanuel Swedenborg. We are because God is. And add, not because of what God isn't. Chapter 15. Your spiritual source knows. Quote, "It is true that divine will prevails at all times and under all circumstances. There is no need to tell God your requirements. He knows them himself and will look after them." Ramana Maharshi. And from Ernest Holmes, "The thing we surrender to becomes our power." As the parent of 8 children, it goes without saying that I've witnessed many occasions when a 2-year-old made a request that couldn't be accommodated. Often the request became a standoff with the toddler crying, insisting, and even throwing a tantrum. But since I was the adult, I'd stand firm and refuse to grant the child's wishes. Running around the block unsupervised, racing through the house with a sucker sticking out of his or her mouth, playing with electrical sockets, climbing up the stairs alone, and putting his or her finger in a younger sibling's eyes were some of the behaviors forbidden by me, the parent, who simply knew better. If we put ourselves in the place of toddlers and give our Creator the very same leeway that we as parents took with our children, the purpose of this metaphor becomes perfectly clear. Just as it's absurd for a 2-year-old to insist on having his or her way, our creative spirit doesn't need to be reminded of what to do for us or how to go about doing it. It already knows. In fact, there's a wonderfully enlightening quote in the Bhagavad Gita that says, "Only the fool, whose mind is deluded by egotism, considers himself to be the doer." When we're about to enter into a discourse with our Creator, it's crucial to approach with the understanding that we aren't the doer. It may sound a bit extreme, but this is how Immanuel Kant described our situation. God is our owner. We are His property. His providence works for our good. Please don't take the word owner as an insult. It's only the ego that's offended by this concept. In other words, we needn't presume to tell our source what needs to be done to provide us with a happy, fulfilling life. Instead, it's our job to change our thinking so that it's vibrating to a frequency that matches God's energy. And this begins by understanding that it's impossible for God to forget anything. Unlike human parents, God is omnipotent, so it's unnecessary to remind Him of our needs. Trusting and surrendering. Returning to the analogy at the beginning of this chapter, most children are free-spirited little beings who don't think about questioning their parents' judgment. After all, most mothers and fathers know what's in their offspring's best interest, including what's required for successful survival. These senior partners look out for their kids' needs and direct their early life activities, and they do this as long as is necessary, which is usually until their children begin to develop the ability to trust their own instincts and apply what they've learned. As adults, we can look back on our earliest days with a strong sense of appreciation. We learn not to play in traffic, to avoid eating poisonous foods, to get enough rest each day, and so on. Today, we feel thankful and appreciative that our parents were there to guide us toward the responsible, self-contained people we are today. We can appreciate that they did what was best for us, and they never forgot us. I trust that the analogy is clear. Our relationship with God, our all-knowing, never-forgetting senior partner, is just like our childhood relationship with our parents. Just as we did with our mothers and fathers, we're now choosing to trust in the wisdom of our Creator. In other words, we don't need to be told by virtual parents what's best for us. We don't have to rely on so-called religious superiors to keep us in line because we're no longer needy little infants. We now trust our source because we've matured to a point where doubt has been supplanted by faith. Somewhere between childhood and maturity, we surrendered and trusted our parents just as we're now surrendering and trusting the all-knowing, loving source of creation. Co-creating with Spirit. Keep in mind that we can't co-create with anyone, including our spiritual source, unless we're in a place of harmony. To that end, we must suspend our false self, the ego, and stop all thoughts of resistance before we can participate in creating the inspired life we desire, in perfect symmetry with Spirit. Whatever we ask of our source in our prayerful communion will no longer be a wish or a hope. It will become a reality in our mind, just as it is in the mind of God. The how and when of its arrival, which have always troubled ego, are no longer issues. We maintain our optimism in thoughts such as, I desire it, it's in harmony with my source, or it's on its way, there's nothing to fuss about, and then we can relax and surrender to our knowing. Again, as Ernest Holmes reminds us, the thing we surrender to becomes our power. I know that the term surrender is generally associated with defeat, but there's no victor or victim when surrendering to God. This isn't about winning or losing. You see, what we're doing here is giving up our false self in favor of returning to our authentic self. And when we do, we'll meet our spiritual Creator and become empowered to live in the same vibration with it. We'll become co-creators by surrendering and joining the all-knowing, all-creating force that allows everything to come into existence. Then our knowing replaces our doubts, and divine will prevails at all times. Only now, we're in harmony with that divine will. Chapter 16. It's all about remembering. Quote from A Course in Miracles. The memory of God comes to the quiet mind. It cannot come where there is conflict. For a mind at war against itself remembers not eternal gentleness. What you remember is a part of you, for you must be as God created you. Let all this madness be undone for you, and turn in peace to the remembrance of God, still shining in your quiet mind. Everything we've ever experienced is still stored as an invisible memory, and we can access it if we choose. For example, when my grandmother was close to death and doing what some call involuntary hallucinating, she was pulling out all kinds of facts from her earliest days. Street addresses, the names of neighbors, locations of family outings, relationships with friends of her own mother, who were only there in my grandmother's infancy. All of it was somehow available to her. It turned out that in some mysterious way, Grandma was tapping into memories that everyone else thought couldn't possibly be recalled because she was only a baby at the time. I have no idea how she did this. All I know for certain is that we reach into our own personal history and bring to the present thoughts that impact our state of mind as well as our level of inspiration. You see, the mere recollection of something in the past that we call a memory is capable of affecting us either positively or negatively in the present moment. Therefore, they're extremely powerful tools for our current state of mind. Obviously, there are some negative memories lurking around somewhere in the nethermost regions of our mind. But why access them if they're going to cause us to feel uninspired? What I'm trying to make clear here is that we've got to figure out how to return to where we came from in order to commune with our spiritual creator. Therefore, being inspired itself is going to require us to go back and do some major remembering. Remembering your spirit. At the beginning of this chapter, there's a powerful quotation from A Course in Miracles that I feel sums up all we need to know to facilitate going all the way back, that is, prior to our baby days, our birth, and even our conception. It's about remembering our origination. I committed this passage to memory many years ago, and I use it as a way to remember who I truly am and where I really came from, particularly when I communicate with my Creator, to stay on purpose and in spirit. Now I'd like to go through each of the messages in this observation from A Course in Miracles one by one. Number 1, the memory of God comes to the quiet mind. We came from a quiet, peaceful place. That's the very essence of creation. So when our mind is filled with noisy dialogue, we shut out the possibility of remembering our spirit. Incessant chatter keeps us attached to the physical world and produces anxiety, stress, fear, worry, and so many of the emotional reactions that are decidedly removed from God realization. We must minimize distractions when we wish to communicate with God. So being in nature, away from the artificial noises that invade our space, is helpful. But the most important thing to consider is how to keep our mind free from the dizzying, bewildering cascade of thoughts flowing through our head from morning till night, and even on into our dream state. It's been estimated that we have something like 60,000 separate thoughts every day. The real problem is that we have the same 60,000 thoughts today that we had yesterday. I've made the practice of meditation a part of my daily life because it's one way to quiet the mind so that the memory of God is accessible. So by learning to meditate, or at the very least shutting down the inner dialogue produced, directed, and acted upon by your ego, you can open up a space for remembering and returning to spirit. 2, it cannot come where there is conflict. In order for conflict to exist, there must be two opposing forces at work. That is, one force, in the form of an idea, a point of view, a desire, or a contribution, directly clashes with another. Conflict defines our lives in many ways, as we oppose our partners, our children, our bosses, our neighbors, and even our countries. In politics, it's always one party versus the other. And the entertainment industry portrays battling points of view that are usually turned into violent scenes. Essentially, conflict requires two-ness. However, remembering where we came from involves our returning to the oneness of being in spirit. After all, there are no battling powers in the divine realm of spirit. There's only perfect oneness, and this is what we want to rejoin. We want to become one again with our Creator, and we can't retrieve this memory of God with a mind in conflict in any way. 3, for a mind at war against itself remembers not eternal gentleness. The second part of this teaching from A Course in Miracles reinforces that a combative mind cannot remember where it once resided in eternal gentleness. Obviously, you can't wage war and simultaneously focus on peace and gentleness, and it is eternal gentleness that you want to remember and rejoin. It's really quite simple to do this. Just close down the battlefield and surrender. Remove all of the artillery, send the soldiers home, and replace the instruments of war in your mind with thoughts of peace, tranquility, and surrender. Making your mind a place of peace is achieved by your own will, so steadfastly refusing to have thoughts of conflict allows you to activate the glory of remembering your spirit. 4. The fourth part of this quote. What you remember is a part of you. Every memory I have is me. What a glorious feeling it is to know this. We each have the power to retrieve any piece of ourselves that we desire and to experience it right here, right now, in this present moment. The great Danish theologian Søren Kierkegaard once observed that life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards. In other words, if we can't go back and remember the spiritual bliss that defined us before the beginning, we've really abandoned a part of ourselves. As we move into communion with God, we must know that our inability to remember our spiritual origins is another way of really saying, quote, I'm unable to know myself because I have no recollection or memory of my spirit. Unquote. In fact, the corollary of this line from A Course in Miracles that we're processing right now would be, what you don't remember is not a part of you. In other words, if we fail to remember spirit, then obviously it isn't a part of us. And 5, for you must be as God created you. As you communicate with your source of being, know that you're awakening a part of yourself that's just like God. In fact, you ought to try to approach communication with God by being as closely aligned to the way that you were created as possible. That is, by becoming a vibrational match to the all-loving Creator. Come to the quiet moments in consultation with God in love, in peace, and without judgment. As A Course in Miracles is saying, you must be as you were created. So why put on a false mask and pretend to be anything or anyone else? In this way, you can open the channel of communication because you finally remembered to be the way you were created. And that's the key to effective prayer. And as Gandhi once said, prayer is not an old woman's idle amusement. Properly understood and applied, it's the most potent instrument of action. And 6, let all this madness be undone for you, and turn in peace to the remembrance of God still shining in your quiet mind. Let's take the 3 suggestions in this teaching one at a time. First, A Course says, let this madness be undone. The madness here is that of living in a state of conflict. In other words, we must make an attempt to transcend the dichotomies of our life because the division creates so much suffering and keeps us from living an inspired life. I remember a Ram Dass lecture in which he said, I firmly come to the conclusion that there are no thems for me anymore. I can't be told who to hate, who to fight, who to subdue. I only see an us in my heart. All those messages to divvy up our world are insane. All our self-centeredness just drives our ego's insatiable appetite for making us special and putting other people down. All our inclinations towards violence, even when it's acceptable, such as supporting war in the name of patriotism or endorsing hatred in the name of doing our duty, are wrong. The Course encourages us to be done with this madness once and for all, both in our minds and in our actions. And second, we're told to turn in peace to the remembrance of God. Once again, we know in our heart that we came from a place of peace. So any discord can't be the result of our Creator's actions. God cannot come to us when we pray from non-peace, so the solution is to return to the remembrance of Him and ask to be made an instrument of His peace. When I find myself out of sorts, I remember. And what I remember is to turn to peace right now in prayer. I become peace rather than anguish, and I feel the calmness I long for come over me like a wave of pleasurable relief. We always have the power within us to shift into a peaceful mode. And when we respect someone, we're able to be in peace in their presence by suspending our inclination to be arrogant. For example, I recall watching John McEnroe behave in boorish ways on the tennis court, slamming his racket, hurling profanities at the referees, and generally being in a very non-peaceful state. But he never behaved this way when he played his rival, Bjorn Borg. Amazingly, McEnroe was almost always able to control his outbursts of negativity whenever he played this cool, easygoing, non-violent, brilliant tennis player. Because he respected Borg so much, McEnroe came to his presence in peace. Finally, the Course reminds us that this peaceful remembrance is still shining in our quiet mind. Notice the words still and quiet. Regardless of where we are in life, if we're breathing, we're connected to our source of being. Even though the connection might have gotten a bit corroded, we still have the remembrance of God shining inside of us. It can't be otherwise. Our job is to access those memories, and it will help if we keep them in our quiet mind. This remembrance doesn't shine in our ego mind, our noisy mind, in our self-important mind. Rather, it shines in a quiet, nonviolent, peaceful, loving mind. When we go to the quietness, that shining is a luminous reminder of how to approach our creative spirit by remembering. You don't have to learn a single new thing in order to communicate and make conscious contact with your source. It's all in you already. All you have to do is remember. Chapter 17, The Language of Spirit. Quote from Satya Sai Baba. When asked where God is, people point towards the sky or some far and distant region. No wonder then that he does not manifest himself. Realize that he is in you, with you, behind you, and all around you, and he can be seen and felt everywhere. Unquote. In the previous 3 chapters, I've tried to stress that it's our job to take responsibility for opening the channel to communication to God, rather than viewing him as a cosmic bellboy whose job it is to listen to our whims and respond just because we ask. But how can we recognize when our spiritual source is getting in touch with us? As Jesus said in one of my favorite quotes, which I've shared thousands of times in my life, with man, this is impossible, but with God, all things are possible. Matthew 19:26. I'd like you to listen to the ideas I'm offering here concerning the language of spirit with this quote in mind. As weird as some of the communication patterns I talk about may seem, and as much as your ego may be tempted to dismiss them as mere coincidence and devoid of meaning, remember that, with God, all things are possible. Being ready for the teacher. It's been known for millennia that when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. Well, our teachers are always there because they're gifts from Spirit. The real question is our readiness to tune in to what they have to teach us. The key word here is readiness. That is, we must be open to all possibilities and trusting in our intuitive hunches. Wondering if something might possibly be a message from God is evidence that we're open to our intuition. Our thoughts are sacred and substantiate our connection to the divine, so they don't need to be corroborated by anyone or anything else. Our Creator is listening and responding in ways that don't necessarily correspond to the laws of the material world. That is, we won't be hearing from a physical source that's aligned with cause and effect, the laws of physics, or even what we believe is possible. It's our job to do all that we can to vibrationally match to that spiritual energy. We were once perfectly together with our creative force, and now we're being called to come back to it. It's vitally important to be open to the language of alignment. Most of us need to begin the process by recognizing our tendency to discount such messages as mere happenstance. In an infinite universe with an organized intelligence supporting it at all moments, there can be no such thing as accidents. For the rest of this chapter, I'll be offering some of my own hunches about how the all-knowing creative spirit communicates. Some of these ways fall into the category of inexplicable alignments, which means that there's meaning there, but our ego mind, chained as it is to its belief in the material laws it has always lived by, refuses to see the hidden meaning that's staring us right in the face. The 4 messages of alignment. For many years, I've felt what I considered to be the language of spirit speaking to me in ways that often defy my logical mind. These feelings are more than hunches and even go beyond intuition, and I sincerely believe that they've contributed to my living an inspired life. The following 4 examples aren't rules or laws that apply to everyone, but if they do work for others, I'll be even more inspired because it's my intention to be in a space where I'm able to give to others all that I know. I also offer these ideas with a constant reminder that when one listens to Spirit, all things are possible. And even though I'm offering them in a numbered sequence, they certainly don't conform to any linear arrangement. 1. Alignment of feelings. When I feel good, or God, I'm aligned with Spirit. As I tell my children, we must rely on how we feel to determine our state of health, rather than seeking our answers in a medical printout full of numbers. Feeling energized, content, excited, and happy are better indicators of our health and well-being than having our bodily functions assessed by a distant laboratory. A positive, honest response to the question, does this or will this make me feel good, tells us immediately if we're aligned with our creative source or not. 2. Alignments with nature. Everything in nature is in spirit. It isn't spoiled by ego, nor can it ever be. So when nature speaks to us, we should listen intently. When a wild bird touches us, for instance, or a fish brushes by when we're swimming in the ocean or a lake, I believe that it's a direct communication from our source of being. Since these creations of God instinctively keep their distance, when they depart from their DNA patterns to actually contact us physically, I think we should pay attention. So be aware of episodes in nature that arouse spirit and kindle an inner spark of awe and admiration for you. You don't have to discuss it with another being. If it has meaning for you, it's valid. Listen to the winds, the critters, the clouds, the rains, and the oceans. Listen to it all. Indeed, nature has much to teach us, and it will help show the way. All we need to do is align with its perfection and note how it aligns with ours. 3. Alignment with events. Strange occurrences and seemingly inexplicable events may actually be our all-creating source lining up coincidences, in quotes, to teach us and show us the way. The reason we begin to notice all this type of aligned synchronicity is because we've tuned into it. The teachers have always been there, but now we notice them. And our noticing indicates a new level of readiness to listen to our ultimate calling. In fact, these alignments can take some really interesting forms. The same numbers showing up, for example. We awake precisely at 4:44 morning after morning and then see those numbers appear on the odometer, on the radio, as a checkbook balance, at the deli counter, and as an assigned number for a charity walk, causes us to ask, what's going on here? The answer is that the universe is using us to be receptive and pay attention. It's not about playing all fours in a casino or the lottery. It's about knowing that these seemingly accidental repetitions are actually invitations from Spirit to join it. When a book literally falls into our lap or is sent to us by several different people, or even when we keep seeing the title and having it referred to us by others over and over, we need to notice, stop our resistance, and surrender. When we end up reading the contents and applying what it offers, we're aligning ourselves and becoming a vibrational match to the same source that's sending us these signals. And 4, alignments with people. When people line up with our thoughts and mysteriously connect their physical presence with our private inner meanderings, we should take note. We must tell ourselves, Spirit is aligning my thoughts with events that are happening. I'll stay alert to what I'm being offered here because there may be a reason. That's all. Just be cognizant of what might be happening, and by being open to what may be baffling and perhaps indecipherable, we're likely to discover that we're being guided to learn. A few weeks ago, I was reading through a book I'd written 16 years ago. In it, I mentioned a friend, Erlene Rintz, whom I'd attended school with from 4th grade through high school. I put the book down and went jogging, yet Erlene was still on my mind. I thought, I'm going to call her the next time I'm in Detroit. After all, we're both having our 65th birthdays this year. That very evening, I was scheduled to receive the Martin Luther King Mahatma Gandhi Peace Award from the Unity Church of Maui, which would be attended by approximately 1,000 people. As I completed my speech and walked to the lobby to sign autographs, I saw the little girl who sat next to me in grade school and who was my first love and who occupied my thoughts throughout my school years. Believe it or not, as I was thinking of her more than a half-century later, Erlene was thousands of miles from home and hugging me in the lobby of a theater in Lahaina, Maui. It turns out that she was visiting Maui, had seen the award announcement in the newspaper, and had come to the auditorium to surprise me. It was one of those synchronistic alignments of spirit at work. Somehow, at an unconscious level, I was already reconnecting to Erlene without being aware that she was even in the area. Noticing the same folks showing up in different settings, running into people we haven't seen in a while after we've just heard their names mentioned, and repeatedly seeing an individual's name in magazines, on television, or in a local bookstore, are all synchronistic alignments. Spirit is lining up these sequential happenings for a reason. We just need to be open to learning the reason, and it most likely will be revealed. Perhaps it will be a dream or a sudden instant of eureka, or maybe it will become clearer when simply allowed. No matter how the message comes, we'll look back on it with a renewed insight and the benefit of no longer being closed-minded about such possibilities. What I know for certain within my very core is that there's no separation between us and all that we encounter in the universe. One of my favorite poets is William Butler Yeats. And here he perfectly sums up the ideas in this chapter. O chestnut tree, great rooted blossomer, are you the leaf, the blossom, or the bowl? O body swayed to music, O brightening glance, how can we know the dancer from the dance? You are the dancer and the dance, just as God is. In other words, those messages from Spirit are you if you feel them, because it's impossible to separate the dance from the dancer, the root from the blossom, and you from God. The only place where separation takes place is in your mind, but since you're now heeding your ultimate calling, you're right on your way to living an inspired life. Part 5. A personal look at inspiration. Quote from A Course in Miracles. There is a way of living in the world that is not here, although it seems to be. You do not change appearance, though you smile more frequently. Your forehead is serene. Your eyes are quiet. You walk this path as others walk, nor do you seem to be distinct from them, although you are indeed. Thus can you serve them while you serve yourself. Unquote. Chapter 18. How Life Looks When I'm Inspired. Quote, Give me a man who sings at his work, unquote, from Thomas Carlyle. And from Virgil, they can because they think they can. In this final chapter, I offer my own very personal view on how the world looks when I feel inspired. I'd like to acknowledge right from the outset that I don't live at this level of being in spirit 100% of the time. Like most everyone else, I occasionally have lapses and feel uninspired. Yet these moments have become rarer and rarer. In fact, it's difficult for me to recall a day in the past several years when I felt completely uninspired. What follows is a personal account of how I feel inside and what seems to take place in the world around me when I feel connected to Spirit beyond what I can share here in this program. The story of Jack. The same day that I completed Chapter 17 and read it over the telephone to my editor, Joanna Pyle, on Bainbridge Island, Washington, I had the most profoundly mystical experience of being in spirit in all of my 65 years. The photograph on the cover of this program is a recreation of what happened. When I finished up with Joanna, I went for my daily hour-long walk along the beach. But for some reason, I elected to take a slightly different route along a grassy area adjacent to the beach. I was recalling my friend Jack Boland, a Unity minister in Detroit, who crossed over about a decade ago. Jack loved monarch butterflies, often telling stories of how he marveled at these paper-thin creatures who migrated thousands of miles in high winds and returned to the same branch on the same tree where they first emerged from their cocoons. Before Jack passed away, I presented him with a beautiful paperweight containing a dead monarch that I had found in perfect condition. When he died, his wife returned it to me, telling me how much Jack loved that gift and how much he admired these amazing creatures who had such mysterious intelligence built into their brains, which are the size of a pinhead. Jack always told me to be in a state of gratitude, and he ended every sermon with this message to God: Thank you, thank you, thank you. On 3 occasions since his death, the monarch butterfly has landed on my body. Since these creatures studiously avoid human contact, each time this has happened, I've thought of Jack and thought, thank you, God, thank you, thank you. Anyway, as I walked, feeling grateful for having completed the second to last chapter of the book, a monarch landed on the ground 3 feet in front of me. I said Jack's magic words to myself, thank you, God, thank you, and felt deep appreciation for my life and the beauty of the day. The butterfly stayed right there until I approached it. Then it flapped its wings several times and flew away. Thinking of Jack and feeling a little bewildered and immensely thankful, I watched this creature in flight now 40 or 50 yards away. As God is my witness, the butterfly made a U-turn and not only headed in my direction, but landed right smack on my finger. Needless to say, I was shocked, but not totally surprised. I must confess that it seems to me that the more I stay in spirit, the more I experience synchronicity similar to this one. But what followed did border on the incredulous, even for me. This little creature became my constant companion for the next 2.5 hours. He sat first on one hand and then moved to my other hand, never even coming close to flying away. He seemed to be trying to communicate with me by moving his wings back and forth and even opening and closing his tiny mouth as if attempting to speak. And as crazy as it may sound, I felt a deep affinity to this precious living being. I sat on the ground and simply stayed with my new fragile friend for 30 or so minutes. Then I called Joanna from my cell phone, and she was also stunned by the synchronicity, insisting that I somehow get a picture of this event. At this point, I decided to return to my home approximately a mile from where I was sitting with my new companion. I returned along the beach walk where the winds were brisk. The butterfly's wings were pushed by these high gusts, but he clung to my finger and even moved to another hand without making any effort to leave. As I walked, I encountered a 4-year-old girl with her mother. The girl was sobbing over some perceived tragedy in her young life, and when I showed her my pet butterfly, her expression went from sad to blissful in one split second. She smiled from ear to ear and asked me all about the winged creature on my forefinger. When I got home, I was talking on my cell phone to my friend, Reed Tracy, as I walked upstairs. He laughed with me as I related the bizarre synchronicity at play at this very moment. I said, "Reed, it's been 90 minutes, and this little guy has adopted me." Reed also encouraged me to get a photograph of this, since it was obviously in complete harmony with what I was writing. I left my new friend, whom I now call Jack, sitting on the handwritten Chapter 17 on my lanai, and went downstairs. I found Cindy, a young woman who works nearby, and asked her to run to the store and purchase a disposable camera. She did, and I went back to the patio, put my hand next to Jack, and watched him jump right onto my finger. The photo on the cover of this program is a recreation of that magical moment, and it's the exact butterfly as well. It appeared that my butterfly companion had decided that he was now going to live with me forever. After another hour or so of meditating and communing with this little creature of God and pondering this event as the most unprecedented and out-of-the-ordinary spiritual experience or episode I'd ever encountered, I gently placed Jack back on my manuscript while I proceeded to take a long, hot shower. When I returned to the patio, I placed my finger near my winged friend, and as I'd done many times in the previous 150 minutes, but he now seemed like a totally different little critter. He fluttered away, landing on a table, flapped his wings twice, and flew off straight upward toward the heavens. Moments with him were now history, but I still had the photographs, which I treasure. The next morning, I decided to watch one of my favorite films, Brother, Sun, Sister, Moon, which I hadn't viewed for more than a decade. And sure enough, in the opening scenes of Franco Zeffirelli's interpretation of the life of St. Francis, there he was, with a butterfly alighting on his fingers. Inspirational Vibrations. When I live my life so as to be open to the language of spirit, I find almost overwhelming rapture overtaking me. For several days after my experience with Jack, people kept telling me that I seemed so peaceful and content, and one woman even suggested that I was walking grace. This episode with my butterfly friend and the communiques from spirit touched me at an unprecedented level. From the perspective of being in spirit, I've seen its hands embrace me and heard it say, "You are not alone. You can count on me to guide you, and whatever you do not doubt my presence." This makes me feel safe, comforted, and that I'm not alone. I feel good. I feel God, because I'm living in almost perfect harmony with the source of my being, living on purpose and writing from my heart. The reason I feel inspired isn't because the world looks perfect. Rather, it's the other way around. The reason the world looks perfect to me is because I'm in spirit, a person who chooses to live an inspired life. I'm able to stay in a state of gratitude from the moment I awake early in the morning right up until I close my eyes while falling asleep. And throughout each day, I'm reminded that staying in spirit is really about staying in vibrational harmony. I don't find it necessary to change anyone or anything that I encounter or read about in my daily life. Each time that I'm tempted to, I catch myself and return to a mindset that calls to me to be more like God, right here and right now. I stay inspired by making an energetic shift within myself. When I do, the world looks completely different, and I move inwardly toward peace and kindness. The energetic shift is merely a way of processing people and events from the insight of being unified with the all-creating source. That is, by eschewing judgment and allowing the world to be as it is rather than as I think it should be. I stay inspired by encouraging others to live out their destiny and allowing the world to unfold as it will, and I'm much more likely to feel peaceful. In fact, when I'm living my life from this perspective of inspiration, my vibrational energy is more attuned to that of the creative energy of the universe, and I find that my effect on others is far more spiritually aligned. Furthermore, I know within my own being that I'm doing something very powerful to make this world a more spiritually oriented place for us all. You see, when I resonate to anger, shame, hatred, or revenge, I add to these decidedly non-spiritual energies by joining in what I find to be so objectionable. But when I remember to bring non-judgment, love, tolerance, and compassion to these low, ego-dominated energies, I see how different the world looks, and even how different those around me act in the presence of these God-realized energies. I feel optimistic when I'm in spirit, with an inner knowing that nothing can interfere with an idea whose time is coming or has already arrived. I trust that our Creator knows what it's doing and that good triumphs over what ego believes is bad or evil. I sense that we're all moving toward a world that will no longer know the horrors of war or practice our long-established habits of inhumanity toward our brothers and sisters around the globe, who may have different cultural views and their own unique physical distinctiveness. By staying in spirit, I'm truly inspired to see the potential for greatness that's in all of us as one people, and I turn from anguish to faith that at least I can live from a place of God realization and practice being a force for good or for God. Staying in vibrational alignment with spirit allows me to be more present in all of my life activities. I find myself less concerned with goals, outcomes, winning, and accumulations, and far more involved in the process of enjoying the activities of my life. Arriving seems to replace striving, and being in a state of flow is far more common than my old, uninspired state of worry and anguish. I remind myself that spirit is only here and now, not yesterday, not tomorrow, only now. By keeping my vibration aligned spiritually, I see the ecstasy in the present. Everything else that once was a source of worry doesn't come up for me, since the outcomes are already handled for me in my own mind. What will be, I remind myself. The world looks so much more peaceful when I approach it this way, and my ego, which once needed to win at all costs, is relegated to a distant seat in a stadium in another galaxy. Choosing inspiration. My experience with Jack, as well as many similar kinds of episodes in my life, taught me that the laws of the material world truly do not apply in the presence of God realization. And I know that I have the choice to live at this level of inspiration. When I do so, it seems that the world changes. Animals behave differently than their biological genetics would seem to allow. People at a distance seem to hear me telepathically and respond to my highest thoughts. Objects seem to materialize in defiance of what scientists say is possible. And healing takes place in spite of modern medicine saying otherwise. In other words, miracles seem to be ordinary. The world looks like a place where everything is possible, where restrictions and limitations are non-existent, and where the power of our Creator seems to roll right up and land at my feet, begging me to hop on board and witness the infinite possibilities it offers. This is how I feel when I align myself to spirit, cocky inside because I know something that so few ever come to realize, but humble and awestruck on the outside at the miraculousness of it all. When I remember to stay in spirit, I've realized that when one thing appears to be going wrong, I can see clearly that 10 things are going right. For example, if my cell phone isn't working, I can note that my health is fine, my family is safe, the ocean is calm for swimming, my bank account has a surplus, my electricity is fully functional, and so on, and on it goes. From a perspective of being in spirit, I automatically shift my attention away from what's going wrong and onto what's right. This then becomes my point of attraction, and I attract more of what I'm focused on, whereas at an earlier time in my life, I'd attract more of what was going wrong because that was my point of attraction. How sublimely beautiful the world now looks to me from this magnificent place of inspiration. No longer do I stay focused on and attract more of what's going wrong, for I've learned to place my attention on what's right, what's working, and what's aligned with the all-creating spirit. From this place of inspiration, I ask, what if I looked deep within myself and found no original sin at all? That is, what if I discovered original innocence instead? What if the same were true for everyone? I know that our creative source is one of good, and I also know that we must be like what we came from. Therefore, everyone, including myself, is a piece of God. We came to this world from innocence and love, not from a place of sin or weakness. When I see Christ consciousness in everyone, even those with whom I differ greatly, I'm able to feel good, to feel God. When I know that there's no original sin in anyone, I'm able to think like Mother Teresa, who told the world, in each person I see the face of Christ in one of his most distressing disguises. When it is goodness that I look for, rather than sin and weakness, that's what I see. I then see goodness in the little old lady driving slowly in front of me, the elderly man fumbling with his change and delaying me at the cashier, the children squealing loudly as I'm attempting to concentrate on a book, the teenagers shouting along with their ear-splitting rap music, or the jackhammer operator whose deafening sounds fill the air with chaos. When I'm inspired, I see God realization, disguised as a minor blip, and the world looks fine, happy, and even peaceful. I remind myself of Rumi's sage advice: if you're irritated by every rub, how will you ever be polished? When I feel inspired, I notice how much zest I have for life and everything that I do. I play tennis with exuberance and without fatigue. I write from my heart. I feel good. I feel God. And this inner feeling radiates outward in all of my waking moments. Inspiration means doing what I love, and even more significantly, loving what I'm doing. It's my willingness to bring love and passion to the activities of my life, rather than looking for love to emerge from those events and activities. It's an attitude, and knowing this, I remember to pick a good one as often as possible. I know that being enthusiastic feels good, and I also know that I have the choice to select these attitudes at any and all times. By staying in spirit, these outlooks on life become second nature to me. By deciding to live an inspired life, I'm choosing to be in balance with a creative force that responds to my in-spirit thoughts. I'm also believing that I live in a friendly universe rather than an evil one, and feeling supported by it in a similar manner, being grateful for all that God sends my way. I'm not surprised when synchronistic events happen in my life. When I have someone on my mind who lives some distance from me, I actually expect that he or she will call me, and it occurs over and over and over. I know that thoughts are energy, and that those harmonizing with spirit will align to activate the creation process. I love watching all this flow so perfectly and being in harmony with the force that's responsible for all of creation. I know deep within me that I can participate in the activities of this force to bring into reality the manifestation of my spiritually aligned desires. Rather than hoping, wishing, and even praying for an outcome, my inner world aligns with the idea that what I desire is feasible and on its way. This kind of inspired knowing frees me from anxiety and worry. I affirm, it's on its way. There's absolutely nothing to fuss about. And I leave the time of its arrival into my life in the hands of the all-knowing, always creative spiritual source. I find that I no longer question the creator of the universe because I'm at peace with the timing of everything. I know enough now not to push the river, not to demand that the timetable of my ego be the same as God's. I know that by staying in spirit, I'm actually participating as a co-creator, and that the more I stay in this aligned space, the more it seems to speed up the process. I've noticed that ever since I've become more conscious of staying inspired, and all that this implies, the time between what I think and having it actually show up in my physical life has become shorter and shorter. I'm aware that the ultimate in manifestation is a complete absence of any delay between a thought and its physical manifestation. What's been called the gift of loaves and fishes is what true 100% God realization is. That is, think food and it appears. Think well-being for everyone and disease dissolves. While I know that this Christ consciousness is available for all of us, I have many more glimpses of it as I stay more in spirit. Singing my song. The major change that's taken place for me in this manifestation of my inspired desires has been the awareness of my own capacity for activating the creative force to work with me. Today, as I live consciously in spirit, I feel as if I'm more and more able to be an activator of this divine synchronistic force and have it work with me rather than to me. I view these mystical moments as holy instants when my ego is suspended and spirit, in conjunction with my own divine desires, has become the teacher. As my sense of inspiration grows within me, I find myself wanting to do more for others and focusing less upon myself. What I desire is realized through the paradoxical means of desiring it for others even more than I want it for myself. By reaching out in this way and deliberately looking for ways to inspire others, I feel closer and closer to spirit, and ironically, I sense that more of what I desire seems to be flowing back to me as a result of this sharing. At this point in my life, I feel that staying in this glorious state of inspiration practically requires me to avoid condemning others. I look at the behavior of others, even those whose actions are anathema to an inspired world, and I send them love. I know deep within me that declaring war on the problems of violence, poverty, cancer, AIDS, and drug addiction isn't the solution. I'm uninterested in increasing these problems with violent, angry, or hateful thoughts or behavior. I know that I can't get sick enough to make one person better, or angry enough to end violence anywhere. I also sense very strongly that by staying in spirit and bringing a higher mental energy to the presence of these lower, ego-based energies, I'm a force for change, one that helps move the world closer to spirit. I anticipate a planet at peace, along with health, abundance, and love in my life and in the lives of all others. And I know that it's moving in this direction. I know that for every act of apparent evil, there are a million acts of kindness. That's where I place my attention, and that's what I choose to give away. By doing so, for the larger percentage of my days, my reward is a feeling of being in harmony with purpose. I watch the mynah birds sing every morning, and I know they're not doing it because they have the answers to all of life's problems. They have a song inside of them that they obviously feel compelled to let come out. I too have a song to sing, and by staying in spirit, I'm able to sing it all day, every day. I know that the answer to what should I be doing is to see the word yes on my inner screen. Yes, I am listening. Yes, I am paying attention. And most important, yes, I am willing. I notice that those around me who feel uninspired or unwilling to say yes to the feelings at the core of their being. By doing so, to every hunch, burning desire, and thought that won't go away, I feel the hand of a guiding spirit that's with me simply because I've been willing to say yes. By saying yes to life, I see the world and all of its inhabitants in a completely new way. As a result of being more and more inspired, I see spirit in virtually everyone I meet. And I feel much more connected to everyone as a result of sensing their spirit instead of noticing all of the accumulations of success that they've amassed. I call this seeing with my mind and not my eyes. It now seems that my identity is associated with experiences that are not exclusively of this world. And I love what my mind sees, possibilities and openings for miracles. It looks past the limitations of my eyes, and it knows that we're all one in an infinite world. My mind no longer views death as something to fear. Rather, it lives in an infinite place, and it is able to step back from this corporeal world and be an observer. Adequately conveying how I feel when I'm inspired is probably impossible. What I so sincerely want to share here is that the feeling of being completely in harmony with our source generates miracles everywhere. I have the delicious, spine-tingling sensation of bliss as I observe and interact in this world from the wondrous vista of being inspired. These words from A Course in Miracles ring true for me. All that must be recognized, however, is that birth was not the beginning and death is not the end. This is the knowing that I have from this infinite in-spirit perspective. There are no conflicts. All is as it should be. The things I wish to improve aren't going to be accomplished by fighting, but by placing my attention on staying connected to spirit. In 1 Corinthians, St. Paul says, "The very fact that you have lawsuits among you means you have been completely defeated already." As I live from a place of inspiration, I see that conflict is no longer possible for me, and I understand what Paul was attempting to say to the people of Corinth in that letter. I will not be defeated. I can't, because for me there's no they any longer. There's only us. I've turned my mind to spirit. I know that God created me to be like him, and I must be what I came from. This idea, more than any other, inspires me beyond what I can share here in this program. It's my intention to continue to stay inspired and live what my mind knows, rather than only what my eyes see. And my mind knows that we're all in a universe that has a creative, organizing intelligence supporting it. I know that it flows through me, and God willing, I'll stay in spirit and assist you to live that life of inspiration that you came here to live. There can be no greater blessing. I send you love. I surround you with light. And I invite you to live with me in spirit. God bless you. Namaste.